I did my honors contract on Erving Goffman. Goffman developed the dramaturgical school of sociological thought. This is based on interactionism, in which someone designs their social interaction to be seen by others a certain way in order to improve their image of self. Goffman's parents were from Ukraine and had settled in Canada before Goffman was born. Growing up, Goffman likely noticed that his family got a lot of looks and was treated by society differently from the clothes they wore, the language they spoke, and the accent they spoke in. Relating this to the dramaturgical perspective, Goffman and his parents probably had to assimilate to Canadian social norms, and through interaction, they probably had to appear Canadian themselves. Goffman's family was also really into theater, which probably accounts for his initial curiosity about the way people present themselves in everyday life. He acted in plays that his mom put on, and also played a role in his high school's adaptation of Shakespeare's play Hamlet. I'm sure he was curious about the characters, and to play this role correctly, he probably psychoanalyzed his character to find their underlying motivations and the correct way to portray these motivations. While reading Dmitry Shalin's study entitled Interfacing Biography, Theory, and History, The Case of Erving Goffman, a rare quote stood out to me. When speaking about his upbringing, Goffman said, "I grew up in a town where to speak another language was to be suspected of being homosexual." This suggests that, as a Jewish boy growing up, he faced many challenges in society because of who he was. It's also noted in this article that Goffman grew up in an area in Canada where anti-Semitism was prevalent. According to the study, non-Jewish Ukrainians brought their anti-Semitism with them from Europe. Goffman must have felt this pressure by society, and I'm sure he was lost in his thoughts often, trying to figure out how he could not be discriminated against. He knew what it was like to be an outcast in society, leading him to develop his theory of dramaturgy and impression management. Goffman was also very much into chemistry, so much so that he went to the University of Manitoba and majored in chemistry. While chemistry may not be directly related to sociology, studying it probably made Goffman think critically more, allowing him to find comfort in thinking, which could have made him contemplate the nature of society often. From this, he switched from English to philosophy, which no doubt furthered his contemplation of life as he saw it. He then dropped out of the University of Manitoba and was later enrolled in the University of Toronto to study sociology, and thus his formal education began, which broadened his horizons on sociological thought even more. After his BA in Toronto, he went to Chicago. When he was at the University of Chicago studying for his PhD, he met a number of fellow students of the social sciences who he would hang out with and go to parties with. Throughout this experience, he was able to bounce ideas off the other sociologists and discuss their observations. This probably furthered his learning and contemplation of society, as he was surrounding himself with inquisitive minds, which no doubt led to some lengthy conversations about the nature of humans interacting within social situations. I think Goffman's ideas are seen a lot throughout society. People are rarely 100% genuine, and they always seem to be altering their behavior in order to give off an impression so they are liked. In Goffman's book about dramaturgical thought entitled The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life, he notes of many examples that everyone participates in one time or another. For example, there's dramatic realization. This is simply the modification of your behavior to make you appear more enthusiastic about something, while your genuine feelings may not be accurately reflected in the impression that you give off. The impression of fronts is also very prevalent in society. Everyone acts according to a specific social front in a given situation. It may come natural with those who you are most comfortable with, but also may need to be articulated carefully so the expectations of the people you are interacting with are met. For example, we have politicians. When interacting with the public, they give off a front that is carefully designed to make them well-liked, appear wholesome, and appear positive to their target audience, whereas in reality, politicians are often terrible people who lie, cheat, and accept shady amounts of money for votes in order to further their time and power. Idealization is also very prevalent in today's society. Idealization is the practice of sculpting a performance to fit into the understanding and expectations of the society in which it is presented. In our society today, we have the general system of stratification, as Goffman points out. He says that in most stratified societies, there is an idealization of higher strata and the aspiration of people in the lower strata to get to the higher strata. This is undoubtedly seen in social media. While the ideal uses of social media is to organically share your life, most people use it as a means to impress people and look better than they actually are. Rich people tend to flaunt their wealth, and less wealthy people tend to take any opportunity that they have to make themselves appear of a higher group by posting photos, maybe not too often, in exotic locations or on vacation, for example, rather than posting more regularly and documenting the more organic, mundane, day-to-day events that everyone goes through. Something I found especially interesting from Goffman's book was the theory behind how teams operate. He notes that people in any profession tend to enliven their presented performance with movements that show proficiency and integrity in order to establish a good image about the company's service or product. This goes into the concept of a performance team, in which individuals have an agreed staging of their business in order to maintain a certain image. For example, in the world today, we may see this in a news broadcast. On air, the anchors all need to maintain a certain level of professionalism and poise to maintain the image of a reputable news network. However, this image is contingent on the fact that everyone understands the requirements and is willing to maintain that performance. If someone decides to break character per se, Their reputation is put at risk, which in turn will affect the entire company. This is the importance of teams. In the conclusion of the presentation of self, Goffman divides the individual into two categories, the performer and the character. Goffman says that the character one performs is somewhat true to oneself. Goffman says that it is usually seen as something housed within the body of the professor. This differs from a performer in that it gives the performer a different kind of image, which they expect the audience to remember, and, quoting Goffman, hold in regard to him. This is different because the performer does not derive this from the inside of the possessor, but rather it is based on the audience and the fact that there are witnesses that can interpret this image. In life, the character is one who is in touch with their true self and feels comfortable enough to be vulnerable in society, showing off their authentic self, whereas a performer may be a person who doesn't truly know themselves, so they feel that they have to fabricate an image that may not truly align with their true self, and they do not know what they don't know about themselves. Most of Goffman's thought points to the definition of situation. He argues that all social situations involve people attempting to persuade others to accept their definition of the situation. This makes a lot of sense because, for example, let's think about an elevator ride. People generally are antisocial on elevator rides for some reason. However, I like to make conversation in my short time on the elevator. This way, I am influencing the other person to accept my different definition of the situation. A lot of the time, people are taken aback and are visually uncomfortable, but alas, I do it as a social experiment to see how people will respond. Some are pleased and we may get into a good, albeit shallow, conversation, and you may leave the elevator with a happier feeling than normal, because normally you just coexist next to a person on the elevator, not thinking about talking to them, but instead thinking about what you're going to do when you get out of the elevator. In a quote-unquote normal elevator ride, you leave knowing that you just completely ignored another human for no reason at all, and therefore you have no idea how great that conversation could have been, or vice versa. Goffman's ideas give great insight into how people deal with society, and I am very grateful that I took the time to learn about his perspective. I'll be most definitely learning about more of his theories to better understand the workings of society.